really free with you guys. But alhamdulillah, sorry. No, no, it's not that. No, but I wanted you guys to have more freedom than usual. No, I'll talk against them. Even against the rainbow colors, I'll talk against them. Hey guys, but that's not here. I'll give you the reason. Equate it to drinking. I'm against drinking. I'm also against this. You guys are doing it in your own time. That's great. Go do it in your own time. But I'm against it. I'm sorry. You go drink in your home. I'm against drinking in your home. You go do that stuff in your home. I'm against you doing eat in your home. I'm against it. It's just a weird. Don't tell me it's natural. Don't tell me yes, you want to. Go ahead. You think you're that's great. You can think that you're natural. You think you were born as it. Great. but it's wrong. I'm sorry. And just like it's my belief. And then if they try to say, oh, morality, where do you get your morality from? The Bible? Go read the Bible. The Torah? Go read the Torah. What religion allows this? I'm not understanding. And you can even go into biological,
Guys, low-key being gay is weird.
No. If you have those tendencies, seek help, talk to people. There's ways around it. And if we look deeper into it, there may be exogenous reasons for it, unfortunately, in this past age, including suggestions psychologically as well as chemically, unfortunately. So this is actually why it's been more pervasive. There's chemicals that can cause this, unfortunately, and also psychologically, power suggestion is actually very powerful. And this is the reason why it's so like everyone suddenly has a
talk in the microphone, like testing.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Good? Okay.
Also want to make a point.
How do you think I can wrong for this I'm sure crying you're not sure. I'm saying I said I want to say your they said like
He's got the accent, bro.
What Asian of that? I'll one guy who stood up and teach us like this or any gay guy out here. This is weird gay stuff. I'm sorry. Stop. We're trying to he's gonna fake it. Just some more. You're gonna say light color. What's the that's open?
48.
We just got from there. Like just 5 hours ago. I got the fries were good. I got 10 express sports. Oh, what are days?
So overrated, bro. No, but what's the burger? Sequels is good, like just the.
Wait, which sequels? What sequels?
Any
I thought some of them were like haram.
Loki, I haven't had like 5 years.
What about Salem?
Salem is bad, bro. I got to so bad.
But everything's not halal, right? Only some things. Oh, it is. Huh? No, but some of it doesn't say halal. You just have to look around and see, make sure there's a press there, bone. Bone links are not.
You mind sharing the
Okay.
We have to. Your limit is that.
Oh, okay.
This is your limit.
Oh, I see. Gotcha. Is this good? Okay.
If you want to stand where you were, you'd rather stand in here, or you'd rather stand here?
I mean, I would rather stand here because people can see better. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. All right, brothers. Inshallah, we'll get started. Inshallah, we're going to continue our Tawheed series tonight. Inshallah, can you hear me, everybody? I guess the mic is good. Okay. Excellent. So, we've been talking again about a book that is actually freely available on alislam.org, and I highly encourage the brothers here to read it. It's called Theological Instructions. I believe Brother Abdullah has been sending out the link to that book. If you guys have had a chance to look at it, I'm not sure, but it's written by Sheikh Misbah Yazdi, who's one of the preeminent philosophers in Iran, who wrote this book about our basic aqidah, right? Our basic beliefs as Muslims, our theology, and how we should understand our theology. So in this book, he goes through some arguments. He starts really with the existence of Allah, right, as the first big topic. And then he slowly starts to, from a philosophical standpoint, tries to explain how do we substantiate our aqidah as Muslims, right? Starting from the very basics and moving up, So first, we're now on lessons 8 and 9 in the book. But we've been going through, what is many different questions so far. What is religion? What are the things that draw people towards studying religion? We talked about different proofs of God's existence, right? So we're going to just summarize some of the basic things we talked about in the last class, and then we're going to hopefully discuss a little bit more today in some depth. So please recite Alat Salawat, inshallah. So before we get started, I just want to allude to an important event that is coming up. Of course, we have Eid al-Adha coming up, but another very important day is the day of Arafah, right? And everybody knows the significance of this day. It's actually a day where if you are at Arafat, that during your Hajj journey, those people who are have the tawfiq to have gone to Hajj, Arafat is a place where you're supposed to recount your sins, and this in the face of Allah, really, and seek actually repentance towards Him. And actually, one of the big things that is highly recommended on that day is to recite Dua of Arafah of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And this dua, it teaches you how you should look at the day of Arafah. If you read this dua, you will really, really start to understand a lot more about the depth of Imam Hussein's ma'rifah. Many of us, we think about Imam Hussein just as, okay, when it comes to Karbala and, the sacrifice he gave for the sake of Islam, but we don't realize how much of our basically our religion we can take from Imam Hussein. And when you read Dua Arafah, you realize how deep it is theologically, how so many principles we're talking about you can actually find in Dua Arafah. So if you guys haven't ever read this dua, just take a quick perusal through it. Just take a quick read at home, and you'll be shocked at the things you'll find in that dua. And usually it's recommended to recite on the day of Arafah. And I'm not sure, Brother Abdullah, if we're going to be reciting it here, but
I think we will.
inshallah. But
Sunday.
yes.
Program, so.
Dua Arafah, yes. On the day of Arafah, we're going to be reciting that.
But basically, after Dhuhr, you just dua your heart out, basically.
Yeah.
After Salat Dhuhr, 1:30 p.m., the day of Arafah, that's the recommendation is just pray whatever du'as you find, just pray them. But one of the best ones is
So
Sunday for Arafah, we come 6 o'clock and we do.
if you want to recite the dua together with everybody else,
Yes.
what I'm recommending to you is take advantage of the long day that Allah gave us from 1:30 to 8:30 of just all the du'as that you can find everywhere.
it's highly recommended also to fast on the day of Arafah. If you,
Tomorrow or something.
it's going to be Sunday. Yes. Yeah. So if you brothers can and engage in ibadah on that day, Arafah, it comes from the word ma'rifah, right? So in this sense, that first Arafah, you're recognizing that this dua, if you look at it, it's beautiful. The first part of it is actually it's ma'rifah in the sense of recognition of Allah, right? So Arafah means recognition. So the first part is recognition of Allah, and the second part is recognition of your own lowliness and your own sinfulness, right? So ma'rifah of your own deficiencies and ma'rifah of Allah's perfections. That's what this day is about, So if you, on the day of Arafah, if you can do some self-reflection on your own deficiencies, and you can do some reflection upon Allah and His perfections, that is a huge thing that you can do on that day. So please try to work on that. If day of Arafah should be a day where you're basically completely renewed. You come out of that day, and it should be as if you are completely sinless again, you know, and you're starting your life afresh. So that's the way that if we instill that spirit within us to reflect upon the du'as of Ahlul Bayt, you will see how it has this profound spiritual effect upon you. And this dua, I mean, if we have time, inshallah, we'll go through just a couple lines. I think just the beginning of the dua is so beautiful, and it defines Allah in such a beautiful way. So inshallah, perhaps because this is all about Tawheed, we might go through just a few lines of that. So just before all of that, that was just a brief introduction, but you know, I just want to talk about Burhan al-Imkan again. And we had talked about this last week. Remember, it's the argument from contingency. Can anyone summarize for me what that means, or what we discussed?
Contingency was like who created the universe, and like who created God. That's the
like
argument of contingency, right?
Yes.
It was something made something, but then what made that?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Okay. Very, very good. Brother, was it Ali? Brother Haydar. Okay. Can you tell us kind of?
Contingent beings and necessary beings.
Right.
That, you know, all beings must be either of those.
Yes.
And the whole thing switches.
Right.
It's contingent, what's necessary.
Yeah.
When, you know, everything cannot be contingent.
Yeah.
Because, well, with the switches analogy, there has to be something that actually turns the switches on. Because something that's contingent can be or cannot be.
Right.
There's a possibility for it to not be. What is necessary must be. So you said, well, all things are contingent, and nothing can be. But things are, which means there must be a necessary being.
Right.
So.
Excellent. Yeah. Great summary. Did everybody understand that? So let me just kind of rephrase things in just brief, but Brother Haydar did a great job explaining. So we said that there were all existent things can be divided into three categories, right? One is what we call necessary, right? Necessary, or we'll say not necessarily existent things, but things in general. They can either be necessary, contingent, or impossible, right? Remember we said this? You guys remember that? So, okay. So we said everything in our universe, right? It has to fall into one of these three categories, or everything you can even think of, right? There are things that are just logically impossible that don't make sense. They would fall under the impossible category, like a square circle. That doesn't make sense, right? That's a contradiction. It can't possibly exist, right? So that's an impossibility, right? So everything that we see in our universe, though, around us, can either be necessary or contingent, things that exist, right? So what do we say about contingent? Contingent means that in order for that thing to exist, it requires certain factors to make it actualize, right? There have to be other factors that exist, other causes, or other, you can think of it, other existent beings that trigger that thing to come into existence too, right? So that's what we call contingent.
Dependent existence.
Yes, dependent. So contingent means, you know, like oftentimes even when we're talking, we might say this. It's maybe a little more of an advanced vocabulary word, but we'll say, oh, you know, I'm coming. Somebody asks you, are you coming? You say, oh, it depends, right? That dependency, or like basically you're saying that there's conditions. There are circumstances that would actualize my coming to whatever event, right? So that's the meaning of contingent. Contingent means that other factors or conditions need to exist for something to materialize or actualize, right? So if you think about everything in existence, that's what contingent means, right? Necessary means it doesn't require any conditions. It just is, right? It's actualized regardless of what the condition is, right? So that's what necessary means, right? So we said that everything in the universe has to fall into one of these two categories. Now, there's three possibilities, right? Either everything in the universe is contingent, right? All contingent, right? Two, all necessary, right? And then three, it's a mix, right? So contingent / necessary, right? You guys get that? So basically all existent things, right? We said that we have necessary existence and contingent existence, right? So either everything in our universe is contingent, right? And there is no nothing that's actually exists independent of conditions, independent of circumstances. Everything requires conditions, right? And as Brother Haider said, that is impossible, right? Because why? Because everything is, by definition, requires something else to actualize it, right? It requires a certain condition to make it come to be. So everything is, by definition, in what we call the off position. It only turns on if the right conditions exist, right? So if all things were contingent, nothing would exist, right? So the fact that things exist proves that the universe is not all contingent. There must be something necessary, right? So then the question is, okay, well, let's say everything is necessary. We know that's impossible. We know that's also wrong, because there are situations where, you know, things exist and situations where they don't exist, right? They might exist, they might not exist. It's a possibility. Their existence is a possibility depending on the circumstances. So by definition, number 2 is impossible, right? So number 3 is the only possibility we have, that there's a combination in our universe of contingent existence and necessary existence, right? And we said necessary existence is that existence which is always on the on position. It never turns off, right? And it doesn't require any conditions to actualize it, right? So we had talked about how that must be, you know, a being that is beyond the physical. We had talked about the positive and negative attributes of this, what we call wajib al-wujud, or the necessary existent, right? So I'm going to transition into that, but does that argument make sense to you guys? Do you have any questions about it? It's a little bit philosophically complicated, but I think if you understand this well, it will really help to solidify your belief in Tawheed, and it will make it very, very ironclad. You won't be shaky at all in terms of your aqidah, if you understand this basic principle.
Dependent existences need an independent existence. That's kind of simple.
Can you give like an example?
Yeah, can you give an example?
An example? Okay, so for instance, this water bottle, okay? This water bottle, how does it come to exist? Who could, okay, so the factory has to make the plastic, right? And the water company has to put the water in it. Somebody's got to make the bottle top. There has to be engineers that actually design the shape. There's got to be a label company that puts the label on, right? See how many components go into this, right? So if those things didn't exist, would this water bottle exist? No, right? So this is a contingent existence, right?
So you're saying that everything requires a creator.
So like it basically just clears up like doubts of belief in like
Yeah.
causation though.
Yeah, that's what I mixed it up with.
So the argument that you gave, Brother Muhammad, is the reason why a lot of people get confused. So they say, oh, everything needs a creator. But that's actually wrong. Everything does not need a creator. Only things that are contingent, things that are what we call dependent, require a creator, right? Things that are independent, Allah doesn't need a creator, right? Because He's by definition independent, right?
But then, like relating to your example, wouldn't that make the factories, the people that put the water in the bottle, also independent to the bottle?
So you're talking about relative to the bottle, they are independent of the bottle, right? But they are also dependent on other things. So the factory, for instance, right, requires, for instance, infrastructure for it to actually come into existence. It requires, money. It requires a corporation that actually enacts it and puts all the resources together, right?
To define a factory, you have to have components. Not only physically, even an abstract idea. The idea of factory, you have to have components in that idea itself. Even we're not even talking about physical anymore. Just you can imagine a factory. You have to have components in that factory to create
machines, workers, concrete walls. Everything.
Yes, you got it exactly.
If you want to go deeper, your imagination is also dependent.
Yeah, but all of that actually goes back to this point, right? That helps to really understand this issue properly. If those resources didn't exist, right? That factory, those people who are actually putting all the the label and the plastic and the water, all of those components together, the cap, this water bottle wouldn't exist, right? So its existence requires other things to make it actualize, and those things those other individuals, that factory, they also require other factors to make them actualize. So the thing is, if you just keep going back, nothing would come to exist, right, if everything was contingent or dependent. If every existent thing, if everything that exists needs other factors to make it come to exist, right, then nothing would actually come to be, right? Does that make sense?
When you say creation, you're putting a limit on things. You're putting a time limit, you're putting an action limit, you're putting a cause and effect relationship. Existence is a different issue.
So another way to think about it is, for instance, somebody says, look, I'll give you maybe like it's, let's say, okay, you have a race, right? And, you know, for instance, everybody's waiting to start running, right? But they say, oh, you know, we're not going to run until the person right next to us runs first, right? The other person says, oh, until you run first, I'm not going to go forward. If everybody says, oh, I'm not going to, everybody makes a condition. It's like, hey, I'm not going to move forward unless person X does his job, unless person Y does his job. And that person also says, oh, well, I'm not going to do anything unless you can imagine like sitting at a table, right? You guys were with friends. The bill comes and it's like, oh, well, I'm not gonna.
The food comes and no one
Yeah.
wants the food because everyone's waiting for the other guy.
Yeah.
They're nice people.
Yeah. It's like, well, I'm not gonna pay unless you pay your portion. I'm not gonna pay unless you pay your portion. If everybody did that, the bill would never get paid, right? So think about it in that way. Or if you're running a race and every person says, hey, I'm not gonna take a step forward until the person next to me takes a step forward, then nobody would ever move forward, right? So that's the way you have to think about contingent existence, right? If everything was dependent on some other factor to make it come to be, then by definition, all of them are in the off position. To go into the on position, they're needing something to start the whole process, right? And that has to be something which isn't dependent on anything else. It's not, one person has to be the initiator, right? And it says, if you're gonna, that race is actually gonna happen, one person has to say, you know what? I don't care what anyone else is doing. I'm gonna run first, right? I'm gonna take the first step. If a person who kind of does things without expecting anybody else to do anything, if there's not a person like that,
No need for anyone to
right? So, or think about it. Actually, another maybe a good example for you guys is a school project, right? School projects. You guys get these group projects, and it's like you have like 6 people.
They're all smart, so they've all been in this situation.
Yeah, but it's like seriously though, right? Everybody has like their component, and they say, hey, you know what? I'm not gonna do my part unless Muhammad or Brother Taha does his part, right? And it's like, okay, if everybody says, hey, I'm not gonna do my part unless person X does his part, the project never gets done, right? Somebody has to be like, okay, I'm gonna initiate this project. And the other people, they'll follow suit. But if there's not an initiator, nothing gets done. So think about it in that sense to understand what we're trying to say here. Brother Muhammad?
So I'm just relating it to this theory I heard in philosophy. This relates to Aristotle's theory of
The first mover, right? I think you said, yeah.
So in a sense, it's saying that we're in this cycle.
Mm-hmm.
The God's the one that puts us in the cycle, but he can't be a part of the cycle because then he wouldn't be considered God.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Because if he was part of the cycle, then nothing would actually come to be, because he would be dependent then too, right? So, okay. So then we went into what we call positive and negative attributes, right? So I don't know how I'm doing on time, but we'll try to speed up. Okay. All right. But I think it's worth taking the time, because I really want you guys to understand this argument. Because if you understand this argument, your aqidah will be really firm. It'll be really, really hard to shake you, right? So, okay, so then we talked about positive and negative attributes. Why? Because once you establish that there's a necessary existent, then the question comes up of, okay, well, you Muslims, you believe all this stuff about God, that, oh, he's, all powerful, he's all wise, he's all this, he's all that. But this argument doesn't establish any of that, So where are you going to go from here, right? So that's what a lot of atheists would come and
now what?
okay, well now what, right? So the positive and negative attributes that Sheikh Misbah, he takes it as an extension of this argument. It's actually very logical, right? So when we say positive and negative attributes, we actually use this term in Arabic. They call it as-sifat al-thubutiyya. and al-sifat as-salbiyah. This is used for Allah too, in the sense that there are attributes that Allah has and then attributes He doesn't have, right? So what we call any type of, even when you say, in prayers, right, we do tasbihatul arba'ah, right? We say subhanallah, walhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah, wallahu akbar. This principle is already built into that, right? So subhanallah means Allah is exalted or Allah is glorified over every defect, right? It's what we call tanzih. Yeah, you're basically absolving God of any type of imperfection, right? So subhanallah. Alhamdulillah is a affirmatory statement. You're saying all praises to God, right? You're doing what we call tamjeed. Tamjeed means you're affirming every type of majesty, every type of perfection to God, right? So it's positive, right? So first subhanallah, then alhamdulillah, and then la ilaha illallah. Again, you're negating any type of basically other false god, right? So this is the first two subhanallah and alhamdulillah are actually focused on actions, right? And then la ilaha illallah, Allahu akbar, these are focused on the ontological perfection of God, that there's no other being that exists that is worthy of worship, right? So you're affirming God's ontological, basically that it's only God who exists and nothing else. And then Allahu Akbar, that Allah is again affirmatory, right? Beyond any type of anything you can imagine, Allah is greater. So notice subhanallah, this is something you'll see in the Islam a lot. There's a push and a pull, right? There's always a push and a pull. You're pushing away every defect from God, and you're pulling every perfection to God, right? So a push and a pull. That's what you always have to think about with the tasbihatul arba, and everything in Islam you'll see is like this, that we affirm every perfection for God and we negate every imperfection for God, right? So when we get into positive and negative attributes, actually this principle stems from understanding what wajib al-wujud means, right? Or the necessary existent, because we said, right, there's two corollaries to how we get to positive and negative attributes. How we get to God is perfect, and every type of imperfection is away from God. So the first part of it is that God is, or we'll say the necessary existent, wajib al-wujud, right? I'm just going to abbreviate it N, okay? N is basically self-sufficient, or we'll say independent, I think is a better word. Al-Ghani, right? He is independent.
I think someone is when we say,
yes, and we'll get into that, inshallah. So N is independent, right? The necessary existent is independent, and everything is dependent on N, right? Everything is dependent on the necessary existent, right? On N. Okay. So this is how you actually, so everything is dependent on N, correlates to positive attributes, and N is independent of everything, correlates to negative attributes, right? So what do we mean by this? So we mean, let me take it step by step because I think this is important. Maybe we'll save the essential attributes discussion for next time, because I think that might be a little bit prolonged, but I think this is super important to understand correctly. So when we say the necessary existent is independent, and that confirms negative attributes, what do we mean when we say negative attributes? We mean that God is free of certain things, free of certain imperfections, right? And what are those? I'm going to tell you three big imperfections, okay? So one imperfection that you can identify is basically what we call a tarkib, or composition, right? Composition. The second one is, we'll say, corporeality. I don't know if you guys know. Does anybody know what corporeality means? Yeah. Yep. And then dimensionality. Okay. So, okay. So these are things that God is devoid of, right? These are all imperfections that God doesn't have anything to do with, right? Why? Because N is independent. The necessary existent is independent. Allah is independent of anything, right? So because of that, he's the first originator, right? He doesn't have any contingency in him. He cannot have any of these things, right? And so we said composition. This is in the sense, why is composition something that cannot exist in God? Does anybody remember, anybody recall what we talked about last week? About why that in particular, any type of composition is imperfection and it cannot exist in Allah.
If you can like remove one part, then like.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, good job, Ahsant. Yeah, so
you also have to have something that moves that part away too.
Yeah,
Something is overpowering God.
Ahsant. But even if you think about it from a imagination standpoint, if you could say that, oh, I can separate or compartmentalize Allah, right, and take this part of Him and that part of Him, that means that you could say that these two parts, they're dependent on each other, right? And remember, Allah is completely needless. He has no dependency, right? So Allah has to be simple and without any type of partitions. It's not possible to make partition in God, right? So that's why we say composition cannot exist in the necessary existent. Second thing was corporeality. Why can't that exist in Allah? So being a body, right? Having a body. Why is that something that can't exist?
Huge body.
Yeah.
On the throne.
What is it?
It's I don't know how to call it exactly.
There is a measurement.
What we're referring to is some people say he's just really big. It's big as the universe.
Yeah.
I think if you give him a body,
Yeah.
right, it becomes another like he's dependent on something. And when you have a body, there's the aspect of we're only like what's considered beauty. So other people's beauty is something else, other people's beauty is something else.
Okay.
So there's like God becomes a limit. He becomes limited.
Yeah.
With the body.
Okay. Very good. Yes.
Same thing, I think, like you add boundaries to kind of what he is. So
Yeah.
when he's supposed to be limitless, you add a limit, like a physical limit. Even if it is physical, it's still a limit to add on.
Yeah. Well, I think the other key thing is actually goes back to composition. I completely agree with you guys, and I think you're right on the money with your points. But also, you have to remember that a very, very basic thing to understand about bodies is that bodies, by definition, can be broken down. They have compositionality in them, right? So because they can be partitioned, we said God can be partitioned. So he can't have a body, right? So that's the second thing that we negate from Allah, right? And the third is dimensionality. What do we mean by that?
He takes space.
He can't take space. He can't take up space. He can't exist in matter, right? And he can't exist in. He cannot be dependent on time, right? So, yes, brother. You had a question? Yeah.
Like associating God that he has like your body or he has hands or eyes. That's shirk, right?
Yes, it's a type of disbelief, actually. You know, because you're affirming imperfection. You're saying that God is imperfect, right? So that is a huge issue, right? So at least from within our madhab, within our school of thought, that there are people who do this. It's what we call anthropomorphism, right? Where they anthropomorphize God, or they say, for instance, Jesus was walking God, right? He was God incarnate, right? That, yeah, or that he's three parts. I mean, even Muslims, like you know, especially from the other schools of thought, they do that. They say, oh, Allah has a shin, and he's going to show his shin on the Day of Judgment. Yeah.
Hold on, because that verse in the Quran is saying, right?
Yeah.
They'll see God. To their Lord, they look at their Lord. They'll look at their Lord.
Isn't it metaphorical? It's not.
We'll talk more about it, but yeah.
Yeah. You know, so basically this is something that does exist amongst other schools of thought, right? Where they look at Allah in this sense that, oh, Allah can be compartmentalized, or that he can have a body. And of course, we completely negate that, because by the definition of being necessary existent, he cannot have any compartmentalization. He cannot have any physicality, right? Because those things limit you, right? Right. Right. Ahsant. And then dimensionality. So we said, why is dimensionality not possible? Because time, remember we said first off, space and matter, they are, by definition, they're corporeal. If something exists in space or and matter, then if it takes up space or it requires matter to kind of compose it, then it can be affected by other factors. And the other thing is it's dependent on dimensions, right? So it makes it, you're actually negating the definition of a necessary existent, which is that he doesn't require any type of other factor to exist, right? So that's the other thing.
Bigger than the actual thing inside of it.
Yes, exactly. And then the third thing was dimensionality. So the third thing on this point was time. So why can't God exist in time? Why did we say that that's impossible?
That means he would have a start. He would have a beginning.
Uh-huh.
Well, there's people that think that time is limitless, like it goes on.
It always existed,
Yeah.
right?
Time also linear, so it means there was a beginning and an end. So then you're also adding like a beginning and an end to God.
Yeah. So that's both of you brothers made that point, and I think it's a very good point. Let's just rephrase it a little bit. It actually goes back to composition, right? Because if you say that God exists in time, right, then it's as if you're putting God on a timeline, right? And then you can partition this timeline and say, okay, I can separate this half of God in time from this half of God in time, right? Got it? Yeah. So like to give you an example, we'll take Brother Ali Sorosh, for instance. If we separate Brother Ali Sorosh from all of his experiences in the past, his childhood, his adolescent years, we completely split that off. We just say Ali Sorosh right now at this moment, right? Let's say we strip all of his memories, everything, right? He would not really continue to maintain his identity as Ali Sorosh, right? He would cease to be Ali Sorosh. He wouldn't really have any connection to his past, right? So imagine if you say God exists in time, you're supposing that God is connected. He's dependent on experiences. He's dependent on change, right? God evolves, and that by definition makes God dependent, right? Because you can even theoretically say, oh, I can separate God from this point of time to the next point in time, and that creates composition, right? So that's why it's impossible for God to exist in time. Yeah, brother?
Can you not say that he's the same throughout all time, so he's been all-knowing from the beginning type, like that kind of argument? Or does the argument not exist?
Beyond time is usually.
Yeah, so he exists beyond the dimension of time, right?
He created time, or we can deeper.
But can he not be static when it comes to, so I guess, but that puts him above the dimension anyway, then? Okay,
No, but that would be saying
It's a good question.
that would be saying that he has a start, so he would need the start to exist in the first place,
Okay,
which would make it contingent.
He would need the timeline first, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And the other thing about static beings is, okay, for instance, we'll say this building, okay? Of course, maybe a building's not a great example. Let me see. Everything in the universe, as we know it, has changes over time, right? But let's just propose that we did have a static entity over time, right? It still has certain issues, though, like Brother was saying, start and end is superimposed there, and it creates an issue. But the other thing is that you can separate you can put something on a timeline. If you can put something on a timeline and be able to compartmentalize one half of it from the other half, right? For instance, the past of something, the present of something, and the future of something. If you can compartmentalize it that way, then it actually means that it's possible for you to break this down, and possible for you to say, okay, God's present, depended on his past, right? His future depended on his present, right? So his present wouldn't exist without his past, and that creates an issue. So even if he's static over time, it still creates a problem, right? But so he cannot exist within the dimension of time at all, right?
In terms of time, I think the Israelis were actually the ones who thought that God at first was like this, then he became like this, then he was angry with us, then he became like this.
Yeah.
So I think that it's actually a more common. It's a more common thing than you think about the way they think of God.
The concept of
Yeah.
God changed over time also.
Exactly. Basically, they were changing, and they were changing God with them.
Yeah, so
5,000 years ago they had one concept, then they changed it to something else, and now finally, a lot of what they have today is because what they borrowed from us. If you really look at it, like Maimonides, the number one philosopher who lived in the Muslim world and wrote in Arabic.
Oh, Maimonides.
Maimonides, yeah. In Spain, and he also lived in North Africa and Egypt. So he's like, what do they call him, the Rambam?
He's a Jewish philosopher.
Yeah. So, I mean.
Also, when I talk about Israel, it's just like how God talks about Israel. He's actually he's referring to them to talk to us, telling us not to be like them, because there's hadiths that talk about us being like them.
Because we're the same thing. Muslims are the same thing.
Basically, there's hadiths that say you guys are gonna.
Yes, brother, you had a question?
Exactly.
So I'm not making fun of Jews. I'm actually talking about don't be like those people.
Like as
Not Jews right now. Jews right now.
So you're saying, so you're telling me God is necessary to exist, or even though He's more complex than the universe. So you're telling me something more complex than the universe was necessary in the first place, and saying so the universe couldn't have been necessary. Like how do I respond to that?
Yeah, so this idea of God being complex is something we negated, right? We said God does not have any complexity, right? Because if you say something is complex, it means it's composed of parts, right? And you can partition some parts of it from another part, right? So that is completely negated with Allah, right?
The fallacy here would be something complex is better than something simple, which actually is a fallacy if you think about it. Truly, if you think about it, if you're saying that something that's simple is just one part, a watch is better than something that's simple, it's one part. But we're talking like it's beyond just his parts. He's more powerful than something that's complex because he doesn't depend on parts. So simple isn't a negative connotation. Simple isn't saying that he's nothing, or you're reducing. In fact, being one or being simple is actually more powerful than depending on other parts, like a watch or like a phone or something like that.
I think this question of complexity comes up because they're not understanding the argument from the beginning. They're taking it from the middle, and that's why they create all this confusion. So complexity is a feature of bodies, right? It's a feature of corporeality. I mean,
Dependency, actually.
yeah.
Complex is actually dependent on the body.
But to say, okay, well, the universe is complex, so God must be complex. That is basically you're superimposing that, okay, the universe is, a body that's complicated. It has multiple parts, it's composed of multiple pieces, so God must also be composed of multiple pieces, right? So that's the error in logic that he's making, right? Because we said that actually goes against the very definition of a necessary existent. God cannot have parts. He cannot have complexity or composition within him because he ceases to be a necessary existent. He becomes contingent on his parts, right? So that's why that whole argument is completely flawed. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit more depth. I don't know, Brother Abdullah, maybe I should just stop or...
We should just stop because unfortunately it is a little late.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, so this is a really important point, though. I just want to make this last point. So yeah, that's a really good question. So we said everything is dependent on N. Everything is dependent on the necessary existent. And that is what affirms the positive attributes of God, right? Positive attributes of God can be divided into these three: ever-livingness, omnipotence, and omniscience. So these are al-Hayy, al-Qadir, and al-Alim. These are three attributes of God. God's knowledge, right? God is absolutely knowledgeable. He's absolutely powerful, and he's the ever-living. He never dies, right? So these are the three essential attributes of Allah that can be derived from this Burhan al-Imkan. And how do you derive it? So what you say is every perfection that exists in the creation or exists in contingent beings must be traced back to the necessary existent, because the necessary existent is the source of everything that is, every type of perfection that exists in the contingent beings must have a source. It must have a cause of origination. And all of that goes back to the necessary existent, right? Because there's nothing else that caused things to exist other than the necessary existent, right? So a big question that comes up here is, okay, well, some people, they say, okay, one of the attributes is complexity, right? Like, so for instance, the brother said, okay, the universe is complex. Complexity is a perfection, and God should have that because He's perfect, right? So this is a fallacy, right? Because complexity is a feature of actually deficiency, right? It's actually a feature of deficiency, and we said God is free of any deficiency. Or they say, for instance, humanity, right? Humanity, they say, oh, being human is in fact something. It's a feature of our existence. So God must have that feature in its perfect form. He must also be human, right? So people make these fallacious, specious arguments, right? So how do you refute that? Actually, being human, being mortal, is a fallacy. It's a deficiency, right? And so they try to cast deficiencies as perfections and then project them onto God, right? But God is of course completely absolved of any type of deficiency, and you just have to understand this point very, very well. Another really good example, one of the names that human beings we have is, the people say humans are rational animals, right? Al-hayawan al-natiq is the Arabic definition, or al-hayawan al-aqil, right? So this al-aqil, right, or it comes from the word aql that we all probably know as Muslims. The word aql means rationality, right? So Allah, if you look in Allah's 99 names, you won't find al-aqil, right? You'll never find al-aqil, right? And why is that? Why do you guys think that is?
There's no ration things out. He doesn't need
Okay, well, is God not? Isn't that a perfection? Al-aqil.
Isn't that like a human limitation? Like it's only.
How is it a human limitation?
Like he's already all like athlete.
Yeah.
He has everything at one time.
Yeah. So you're. Yes. So you're exactly right. So al-aqil, right? Someone who is aqil has to exert their rational faculties to get to it. Somebody who is basically, al-aql comes from the word to tie something down, So basically his mind requires basically other things to tie it down, or he requires, his conceptions almost are tying down his mind, or his rationality, his faculty to be able to think is dependent, right? So it's what, and also in Arabic they have this word ta'aqqul. Ta'aqqul means you exert your faculty of rationality to get to an answer. Al-aqil means you have to think, or you have to compute, you have to put pieces together in order to get to the answer, right? You have to tie things together to arrive at an answer. And you won't find Allah doesn't have that, because Allah instantly knows. Allah is al-alim, right? He's the all-knowing, or al-alim, right? So Allah is all knowledgeable, but He's not rational, because rationality is something that's a feature of human beings, right? So, but that doesn't mean that Allah's. So this is a very good example of exactly what I was saying, that there's certain things, certain attributes that people take as, oh, that's a perfection, but it actually is a deficiency. It's a human deficiency, but in the realm of Allah, right, that would actually be a deficiency. If Allah's name was Al-Aqil, it means that He requires other things in order to ground His knowledge, right? Because remember, we said Al-Aqil, something that basically ties down your mind, right? You need conceptions to tie down your mind. And we said Allah is needless. So if His knowledge is dependent upon conceptions that tie Him down, then He becomes deficient, right? So this is a very good example to go back to this point. But this is a very complicated discussion that we can get into later, inshallah, perhaps for the next session. But
العقال what's عقال؟ What's it look like? What's عقال?
It's like a black circle.
I think the Saudis and Arabs wear عقال.
Yeah.
It's that black thing.
Well, the thing that's
The shemag is the little spread, or
the little circle.
the kufi, yeah, whatever. That's a shemag. The black circle, the black thing is عقال.
Oh, I see,
Yeah.
yes.
What was it used for? It's used to hold the horses or the camels. It's used to tie down the camels and the horses. So that thing was actually, that's what they had. They tied it down. These actually put it on their head.
Oh.
So the عقال, العقل.
Ahsant, yeah.
That's why it looks like it's something like a rope. It looks like a rope.
So عقال is the colloquial, Iraqi or Saudi or
Oh, wow.
عقل, عقال, عقال.
Yeah, ahsant. And you know, I think there's a very famous hadith, right? That tie your camel, right?
You can actually tell us the hadith actually. It's actually good hadith about dependency as well.
Yeah, yeah. So from what I recall, it was yes, no. I think I don't remember the exact lafz of the hadith, but I'll just give you the madmoon. But it was like a Bedouin Arab, you know, who basically he just left his camel outside, right, and he went to pray in the mosque, right, and he said that basically, you know, his camel obviously when he came back was not there; it had gone away, right. And so he came to the Prophet and he said, "Look, O Prophet, I did tawakkul. I was praying in the mosque. I did tawakkul on Allah, and I left my camel outside, and when I came back, it was gone." So the Prophet told him, you know, "I'qil jamalak thumma tawakkal." You know, that first tie your camel, then do tawakkul. You know, this idea that, oh, I'm just gonna. Some people have this conception. It's like, oh, I'm not gonna seek livelihood for my family. I'm just gonna go pray in the mosque and, you know, do ibadah and just do like basically i'tikaf in the mosque. And just some people at the time of even the Prophet were such, where they just said, we're going to divorce ourselves from the world and just live in the mosque, you know, and just be spiritual. And you know, the Prophet came to them and told them that, like, what you're doing is completely incorrect, you know, that first you focus on your rizq, you know, obtaining your livelihood, but then also lead a righteous lifestyle, right? This is also what the monasticists, you know, there's a group of Christians that used to do this, live in monasteries, be monks, right? And Allah says in the Quran that, you know, that وَرَهْبَانِيَةً ابْتَدَعُوهَا مَا كَتَبْنَاهَا عَلَيْهِمْ. This is something that they innovated. This is a bid'ah. This idea of rahbaniyah or monasticism is something that Allah never commanded them to do, right? إِلَّا ابْتِغَاءَ مَرْضَاتِ اللَّهِ فَمَا رَعَوْهَا حَقَّ رِعَايَتِهَا. That they were seeking God's basically pleasure, but they didn't observe it correctly. What does that mean? Because Allah doesn't want you to live like a hermit, a monk, completely, you know, compartmentalized off from society, not living in the real world, you know? He wants you to seek your livelihood, right? And then do tawakkul, right? So the Prophet was teaching him this. First tie your camel, then do tawakkul. But look at the word was i'qil jamalak, you know, first tie your camel. This word, if you go back to, you know, Fusha Arabic, that's what it means. Aql has the meaning of tying something down, right? So inshallah, yes, brother.
And also the camel not leaving be a contingent thing, so it needs factors for it to not leave before it happens, as in tying it down.
Yeah. I mean, of course, the whole idea is that, of course, Allah is the one who controls everything, right? But Allah wants you to take what we call asbab. Asbab means thing like if you're sick, you say, "Oh, Allah will cure me. I'm not going to go to the doctor," right? That's not what Allah is. Allah even. Yeah. This is a common argument. Actually, some people they say, for instance, you know, there's a verse in the Quran. Obviously, we recite it every day in Surah Fatiha. إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. Right? إِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ means we only seek you for assistance. So some people say, "Oh, you cannot do isti'ana, or you cannot seek assistance from anyone except Allah," right? So then the argument is, well, then why do you go to the doctor, right? You're seeking assistance from the doctor, right? Like, well, no, because the thing is that Allah has put certain asbab, certain basically causes in the world, right? And He has given them the capacity to exact change in the world, right? So, for instance, you know, everything has cause. There's a system of causes and effects. Allah wants you to use that system because He built that system, right? So in a way, it's by Allah. Yes. So even when you tie your camel down, it's actually a manifestation of you seeking assistance from Allah, right? Because Allah is the one who built that camel. He's the one who built that rope. He's the one who gave you the hands. Everything you have is from Allah, right? So
even the dua that you make, you have to say, "Oh, I'm going to pray to Allah." You raised your hands.
Yeah.
You're using your hands. Why? It's shirk. Why are you using your hands?
Right.
Truly. Why are you using your hands? It's shirk.
Yeah, subhanallah. Yeah, that's a good point. Ahsant. Yeah, you know, so just last point, inshallah, then we'll wrap up. Please recite aloud salawat, inshallah. So I just want to, just the very first part of Dua Arafah. So, and then we could go through it do more sharh, but it's getting late, so we'll just do like the first couple lines, right? But in this dua, Imam al-Hussein says, Alhamdulillah alladhi laysa li qada'ihi dafi' wa la li 'ata'ihi mani', right? So just look at this beautiful, these like 2 lines, and then we'll complete the discussion, right? He said that all praise be to Allah, whose decree, right, cannot be basically overpowered by anyone. That nobody can push away or repel the decree of God, right? That when Allah commands something or Allah wants something to occur, nobody has the capacity to overpower Him, right? Again, that goes back to necessary existence. He is the one who has all the power. There's no factor that can force God's hand, right? So, Alhamdulillah alladhi laysa li qada'ihi dafi' wa la li 'ata'ihi mani'. There's nothing that can prevent God from bestowing His bounty. When God wants to bestow His blessings upon someone, there's nothing that can stop it, right?
That networking discussion that we're having, about like drinking and stuff. If Allah wants to give you the thing, don't worry about it. It's coming.
Ahsant. Yeah, that's a beautiful connection. Yes, so Allah is the one who has the whole kingdom in his hand, right? Tabarak alladhi biyadihi al-mulk. He's the one who has the keys of the kingdom in His hands. So, of course, metaphorically, not we're talking physically, but in the sense that God has the full control over the universe, right? And nothing has control over God. So this very beginning part of Dua Arafah is already telling you about the depth of Imam al-Hussein's understanding of Allah, right? And so you could do this with the whole dua because it's so profound, so deep, but this is just a small little window into how beautiful this dua is, inshallah. And Dua Arafah, if you guys have a chance to read for the day of Arafah, I think it is full of these types of gems, will really enhance your understanding. And actually, I think personally, it makes, when it comes to Azza, when you're actually mourning Imam al-Hussein, it makes that connection with Imam Hussein, that relationship, stronger, because you actually realize the depth of his arfan, the depth of his ma'rifah of Allah, and so it connects you even better to understanding the musibah that he faced, despite the level of the ma'rifah that he had of Allah, right? So inshallah, please recite aloud salawat. We'll stop here, inshallah.